I've heard some positive comments about the program, and I'm glad to hear them. And clearly, what we're trying to do today is try to determine how we can strengthen and improve the program, make it work better in practice. And that's what you're all here to help us figure out. I'd like to. I have a couple of questions. I want to focus first on this valley of death, or as Mr. Hernandez said, the Grand Canyon of death issue in terms of the third phase. And I want to start with Mr. Loper, because you suggested that it has been a problem. And then I'm going to ask Mr. Hernandez to answer the same question. But I'd just like to get just your thoughts on whether or not our proposed changes in the legislation will be helpful in solving that problem, if we're on the right track, if there's something else we ought to be thinking about.
Certainly. I think the draft legislation would make significant improvements in moving to stem that problem.
I believe one of the critical things that needs to be looked at is really how one leverages these federal dollars to bring in the private sector dollars. And while the venture community is quiet for the time being, there's still plenty of capital around that will be probably deployed in the coming years and so forth. So I think using these dollars to leverage those dollars into the system is really the best strategy to provide these sort of public-private interest. My opinion, the best way to do that is to make those amounts be larger. I think it's really critically important. $100,000 takes a lot of time to put these things together. I've had the pleasure of being involved in a couple of them, and sometimes you really do not pursue these grants simply because the dollars aren't worth it. So increasing it would really, in my opinion, make it a little bit more competitive. Also allowing these venture-backed companies to play and propose higher risk projects they typically wouldn't do, I think, is the other way to really stimulate and play an important role in getting this thing moving.
Thank you. I have a question I'd like to put to Ms. Blakey. And you mentioned that venture capital participation is useful in the program, but with appropriate size standard limitations. Can you just elaborate on how you think the best approach is towards the venture capital angle in this program, and how would we determine what the right kind of limitation would be?
Well, I think we see that venture capital certainly has an appropriate role to play, and the flexibility to do that makes sense. But we think the size limitation of 500 employees for organizations that the venture capital is controlling is an appropriate size limit. When you get to very large venture capital organizations, the dynamics begin to change, and there is a question as to whether or not these funds are critical when you're talking about what essentially are larger businesses. The larger venture capital, and the experience we have, at least in our domain area, is also it's often involved with a real press for profitability and shorter-term turnaround than is sometimes possible and appropriate in the kind of R&D that we do. So those are considerations there. I think I'd put one final question before you, and that is one also should take a look at the source of funding. When you're dealing in the aerospace and military arena, foreign capital is something you have to look at as an area where you may need additional safeguards.
A question for Mr. Leahy. I just want to make sure I understand the value in allowing companies to apply for Phase 2 without being involved in the Phase 1. And can you give us your thoughts on kind of where the benefit is there?
Certainly, and I think actually the draft legislation we're not suggesting that without the proper data and meeting the requirements of Phase 2 that they without the underlying feasibility studies done, that they should be permitted to jump in. But I think what we're seeing right now is, particularly in this economic environment, you may have a situation where a company, through family, friends, was able to raise some initial funding and conduct feasibility studies on their own, and perhaps never envisioning to go the SBIR route. But now, with alternative revenue streams, perhaps, or investment streams drying up, I think if companies have those feasibility studies and that would satisfy kind of the Phase 1 requirements of SBIR, to have them actually repeat that process and duplicate it in phase one before they can get to phase two, I don't think is a useful source of the resources. So again, I think the legislation here in allowing that to happen so long as the company has the feasibility studies is certainly a welcomed improvement.
Well, I got one more question, then I'm going to yield to Mr. Schock. But Mr. Biddle, you suggested that there had been some areas where there have been some failures evident, and we're hoping you'd get asked about that. So I'm going to ask you, would you mind commenting on where you think that things haven't gone well, just so we have the lessons that we can apply?
Yeah, let me tell you what a venture capital business is. We're a 14-person small business in Bethesda, and we live to discover and fund small startup companies. And we've been successful. We've created over 10,000 jobs in the Washington area in the last 10 years. Our last fund, we were offered $2 billion. We took $200 million so we could continue to do small investments. I've got a company in Washington, two 24-year-old kids we backed in 1997. They have 1,000 employees today. Does that mean my 4-person startup and I don't control that company, but under the SBA rules I do. We're affiliated. My partner's lead director. So my entire portfolio can't work with the government. And these are some of the smartest people on the planet, and they can't work with the government. That makes no sense. So I'll tell you some real-world stories. A meeting yesterday. There's a company that we have, an ex-government scientist. We backed about 3 years ago. There are 2 investors. We own 52% of this company between us. We put in $11 million. He has a breakthrough in the national security area that is incredible. There's a multi-agency task force who wants to procure millions of dollars of this stuff. And this is a 14-person company who can't make payroll in 30 days, by the way. We're going to have to put in more money. And the small business procurement rules are what allow a 14-person company to be able to work with the government, whether he's venture-backed or not. We got a call yesterday from a procurement officer at the Special Operations Command that they're a large business. They're ineligible. They have to do large business procurement. This is critical technology. Another one which we didn't get to finance, a Taiwanese immigrant, naturalized U.S. citizen, bootstrapped a company. His expertise was in wireless security. And the Department of Defense wanted us to use more commercial technology, but it's not secure enough. He had bootstrapped his business with friends and family, Taiwanese friends and family, and they owned about 20% of the company. Through multiple phases, he won a Phase 3 $100 million award from the U.S. Navy. He needed to raise capital. We put together a term sheet. I brought a syndicate together of Intel, who was going to take this technology commercial once we proved it in the military, and Carlyle and ourselves. We each would have owned, I think it was 13% of the company. When you added it all up, it'd be 52%. The attorneys we hired to look at this said, this is gray. You could be ineligible if you represent your small business. You could be charged with a crime. And Intel and Carlyle said, we can't do stuff that's gray. They withdrew their term sheet. He couldn't raise the money to meet the contract, and he sold out to a big contractor. So there are other stories like that. But we're really doing ourselves a disservice. I think the misunderstanding here is talent's a pyramid, and we don't get them all, but the venture capital industry gets about half of the companies that become great companies with a tiny percentage of the capital. The guys at the top of the pyramid are not there because they're venture-backed. They're venture-backed because they're at the top of the pyramid. So, I mean, we are the best in the world at going under every rock in this country and finding talent, and getting money behind them, and helping them build big enterprises. So that's what we're after. But we start with these small companies. So, thanks.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your frank comments. And again, I want to thank all the panelists for giving us the real-world perspective to help shape the program going forward. Noting there are some other members here, I'd like to go ahead and yield to Mr. Schock for as much time as he would like to consume.